To me, Agile leadership is sort of the next natural evolution of where we should be going. Historically, we've addressed very well at the team level, and I think now we're seeing that in organizations, if you just address the team level, be it one team or even multiple teams, right? Because a lot of the scaling frameworks focus a lot on the multi-team aspect. You hit a ceiling at some point, and that ceiling it will be senior management and executive management. And if we don't have those folks embrace Agile, in sort of a broad way, we're going to get blocked. All right, and good initiatives that could have started bottom up at the team level will eventually hit that ceiling, they'll get blocked, and good people at those companies will just decide to leave. So I spend my days traveling around teaching, doing coaching with teams, and I'm spending more and more time these days with executive level teams. And that's a very good sign. Because I believe that once they're on board and they have the ability to affect the kind of change that actually should occur within companies, and I mean change in multiple departments. This isn't talking about IT senior management. I'm talking about CEO on down. So the CEO of the company, she's got to do her bit, and all of her direct reports, they have to do their bit. See, from my point of view, Agile has tentacles. They reach out and they touch other departments. HR gets touched, finance gets touched, legal gets touched. Each of these and how they operate is important for the long-term success of an Agile organization. So to me, Agile leadership is the next big thing to be addressed, and without it, I think we'll only go so far. And to get the really large success stories that we're all hoping for, if you don't have leadership on board, you won't get them. You'll get point solutions. I think the focus has always been get the teams up and running first. It's an obvious first target. It's not just teams, it's teams within IT. If you think about adopting Agile, bringing it into development organization or IT is the natural starting point, as it should be, and that's how most companies do it. But then it starts to broaden out, and it's that point where I think things become more difficult, that Agile outside of IT, outside of development, is the next step, and that requires a more senior level involvement, a leadership involvement, to recognize that, you know, it's not just those guys over in development or IT that have to do it. If we also don't embrace, we set up impediments, right? There's a natural inconsistency in the system. I mean, there's some obvious examples of this. The one I deal with a lot these days is accounting. You say, well, how in the world would accounting be involved in this? Well, you get into the discussion on expensing versus capitalization. Now, historically, organizations that did waterfall, the accounting department knows exactly how to account for costs. Now, there's very well-defined triggers, very well-defined milestones for when you stop expensing and when you stop capitalizing. And this has a significant impact on both the taxes you pay and your valuation in the marketplace. Now, imagine IT moves over to Agile, but accounting is still unfamiliar with how to do Agile. So they look at these Agile projects, and the first comment might be, I don't see all the same natural triggers that I saw in a waterfall project in these Agile projects, so how am I supposed to account for costs? Now, the knee-jerk bad reaction to that would be expense everything, which would be a very foolish strategy, both in terms of tax consequences and overall valuation of the company. So it's sort of incumbent upon us to work with the CFO, the leadership in this area in finance, to say, let's help you understand how we can do these projects in an Agile-like way and how you can do effective cost accounting with them so that Agile projects aren't penalized. Right? There's organizational examples of where when they did waterfall projects, they could get twice the resources of when they did Agile projects because of the perceived additional cost of doing an Agile project by not capitalizing as much as you would have on a waterfall project. That's a significant impediment, and it exists outside of IT. It exists at the leadership level. It needs to be addressed. And so how do we as a community better embrace our colleagues outside of development and IT, and especially the ones at the leadership level where they're the only ones that can affect change at that level? How do we get them engaged in doing it? And that's just one example. I could give you many others of different parts. You know, HR. I mean, think of HR for a moment. The initial comment is, well, HR should better help us identify the type of technical people we need within development. Right? We tend to favor people with T-shaped skills. Vertically deep in a specialty area, but breadth across some other areas, but maybe perhaps not as deep. Fine, but now I need to make sure that HR understands when you're interviewing people, you should give preference to those people who either have or would like to acquire T-shaped skills. It better helps us form the kind of Scrum teams that we want to form. Oh, and by the way, that stacked ranking that we're doing over in HR, completely at odds with doing Agile within an environment. You know, how do you set up an Agile team over in development and IT when HR has a policy that every member of a given team will be stacked rank against one another? I worked for a very large company, and at that company, my first year there, at the end of the year, I get an email from HR saying, okay, it's time to evaluate employees. You need to assign everybody a 1, a 2, or a 3. 1 is, hey, you're great, we love you. 2 is, you're doing fine. 3 is, I need to show you the door. Well, so my response to HR was, no problem, I will do that. And then where the problem came in is what they said next. Oh, and by the way, here's what percentage of those people need to get a 1, a 2, and a 3. Now, what that meant is on every team, even my highest performing team, there's going to be one person who's going to get a 1. There's going to be 7 people who get a 2, and there's going to be a couple people who get a 3. How do I promote self-organization in an organization that puts team members effectively at odds with one another and saying that you compete, and the bottom line is, I can't get a 3. You can get a 3, but I can't get a 3. And by the way, on my highest performing team, I probably don't have any 3s, but now I feel compelled like I have to give somebody a 3. So now I have an HR problem that's impinging upon our ability to do anything, right, on this level. I've taught classes at a company where at almost every turn someone would say, that won't work here. And I'm like, why? And all roads lead to Rome, and Rome in this case was stacked ranking. Which is why you're starting to see big companies, including GE, move away from stacked ranking. Right? And so these are the kinds of issues at the leadership level. And so this isn't, my fear is that when people hear leadership, Agile and Scrum at leadership, they're thinking IT leadership. Yes, of course, that's obvious. But that's not where the big bang for the buck is going to come in. It's going to come in HR. It's going to come in finance. It's going to come in legal. Why? Because legal wants to go off and write contracts that put us at odds with all of our partners. Why? I mean, most large companies like to write fixed price contracts. Fixed price contracts have obvious problems. They force us up front to define exactly what we want on the day when we have the worst possible knowledge we'll ever have, the first day. And of course, there is no such thing as fixed price contracts, because as soon as we change our mind, the vendor will make it up in the change request anyway. So how do we now work with our friends in legal to say, I understand what you've been doing and why you've been doing it. You've been trying to protect us, to, in a sense, shift risk to the other party. But you know what? If we keep doing that, we're not going to be able to operate with our vendors in an Agile-like way. This list goes on and on. So you want to be successful long-term with Agile? You go to the executive level across all these departments and you get alignment. I think we're at an early stage. I did a blog post not too long ago where I reused Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm model, where he talks about technology adoption. And I think that Agile, Scrum within IT has crossed the chasm, meaning it's made it to the mainstream. I mean, you look at the conference we're at right now, there are mainstream companies here, companies that are not early adopters. You know, they wait until others have proven that it works, and they move when it's safe to move. Within IT, I think it's clear we're across the chasm. I think if you look at Agile at the enterprise level across different organizations, you could argue we're even pre-chasm or in the chasm. And being in the chasm is sort of that dip between the early, sort of minority of the early adopters and the sort of the majority of the people who actually pick it up. Being in the chasm is a dangerous place to be, because a lot of technologies, a lot of ideas die in the chasm. They never make it across the chasm to sort of the mainstream. And I think that's where we're at. And some could even argue we're not even up to the chasm yet. It's really just the early adopters. I've seen enough examples of larger companies that are starting to address this. Sometimes because they've been made aware of the problem, others because they're living it and they realize they have to do something because it's impeding their ability to get the true value of Scrum. I mean, if you have a team, this is the argument I made at my keynote at the Scrum Gathering in 2014 in New Orleans, which was entitled Economically Sensible Scrum. The argument was, if you have Scrum teams that are doing perfect Scrum, brilliant Scrum, by the book Scrum, does that guarantee success? And the answer was no. That in and of itself is necessary but not sufficient to guarantee success. What I argued in that keynote was you have to do economically sensible Scrum, which means you have to embrace this at a broader level. You have to look at the economics of the choice, and you have to adopt core Agile principles throughout the value chain. And the value chain here is all the organizations: sales, marketing, legal, HR, finance, everybody who's touching this. And if you don't, long term, you won't be an Agile organization, and you probably won't get the value that you expect, even if you have great Scrum teams. If you have poor Scrum teams, you won't get the value no matter what you do, right? So yes, please address the blocking and tackling, which is why people tend to send their folks to Scrum classes, right? Let's get a lot of the basic blocking and tackling in place. Necessary, not sufficient. To cross the chasm in a generic sense, you have to have companies that take the initiative, forward-thinking, innovators in what they do, and they work out the bugs, right? See, the early adopters are willing to take a partially baked solution because they can fill in the gaps. And that's kind of where we're at today. So there are really forward-thinking companies. I was at the executive breakfast this morning with several executives that I work with that I invited in, and one of them gave me some really good news that they have adopted a cost accounting model that aligns very much with the way that I was describing it and allows them to account for costs on an Agile project, and they're about to go through a full audit. Which is important because when I tell other companies, I can point you at companies that are doing cost accounting in the way that I'm suggesting. The first question I will get is, have they been audited? Have they survived an audit at that level? So this is what I mean, forward-thinking companies like that, like we're doing it. But no one else is showing you they've got through an audit. That's okay. We're willing to take it down that road. So when you get a concentration of companies like that, that are bold enough to step forward and say, we're going to do this, and they're willing to share their results out. We've done it. Look at us. Then you look across the chasm is the early majority. The early majority is like, we'll move, but we're not first movers. We wait until we see other companies have been successful, and then we'll do it. And then you have the late majority. These are the guys that you have to drag, kicking and screaming, right? When I worked at IBM, these were the guys we would say, you never get fired for buying IBM, right? It's sort of the safe crowd. I don't mean safe as in scaled Agile. I mean, they're looking at it as, this is a career-limiting move. If I do this, they're going to wait until it's like, oh, this is old news by now. How come you haven't done it? Yeah, I guess we should do it. What we're looking at is the early majority. That's in a bell curve. This is a big part of that bell curve. These are the people that have to move over. They're not ready to go yet, and they're not sure they need to, right? But as you get more and more examples of companies that are eating their lunch, and they start to look at why are they eating our lunch, and they realize what they're doing is Agile through the value chain, and the leadership is fully bought in, and it's not something that's, oh, those guys over in IT and over in development, they do this, but we still do things all the same way. Then you get that early majority saying, this is now a competitive advantage, and if we don't move, we have a problem. So what do we need? More and more successful examples, more case studies at that level of organizations that have adopted Agile at the leadership level and have demonstrable benefits, which leads to another problem at the leadership level. If you look at a lot of the data that's out there, and since I mentioned I get asked to go visit a lot of organizations where I speak specifically with the executive management team, every time I'm going to get the following request: can you please bring in data showing what other companies have been able to accomplish? And that is a perfectly reasonable request for them to make, right? You're saying we should do this, very good. What are other companies doing? And so if you actually look for the data that's out there, and I have spent a considerable amount of time looking, and you can find data. The problem with most of that data is that it's output data, not outcome data. It's usually giving you information like, we got a 3x improvement in velocity. That's an output measure, right? What that's saying is we somehow go 3 times faster than we did before. But if I'm producing junk 3 times faster than I produced it before, what was the value of that? So what we need are outcome measures. Show a senior executive you actually moved a reasonable needle on some gauge that matters to their business. I promise you, velocity is not on the gauge of the CEO. not for how fast do my Agile teams move. What they want to know is how fast am I generating new revenue? How fast am I bringing new products to the marketplace? Am I improving my net promoter score, which would be an outcome-based measure, not an output measure? So there's a lot of work that has to be done in that area. And I think, and I was having this conversation with the committee that's working on the Agile Leadership, right, certification of, it would be great for the ScrumAlliance to start accruing a lot of this data. Go out, bring it together, have these case studies available so that as a marketplace, there's a library to go to say, here are some real good examples. Here are case studies of other organizations with measurable outcomes of what they got by doing this. That's what senior executives want to see. Otherwise, it's, to a certain extent, a lot of hyperbole, right? Where's the real data? I mean, most of the people I deal with at that level are data-driven people. They're very sensible, they're intelligent to be in the role that they're in, and they will change their mind if you show them a compelling economic argument. Logical arguments go so far. I do think there are a lot of good examples more at the team level. I think you can find real good examples where a company said, we had a team do this, we got these great benefits, and it's very targeted, and those are excellent, right? And it gives a lot of credibility to adopting Agile at the team level. It does derive real benefits. But you start moving up to that executive level, to the broader Agile through the enterprise level, there are far fewer examples. So me personally, I'm not sure that they're not sharing it. I'm just not sure they exist in enough of them that we're finding them and bringing them. There's clearly some out there. I mean, I'm running into companies that are doing it. Every time I engage a company, the first thing I say is, you got to write a white paper. Or you got to go to a company, you got to go to a conference rather, and you got to give a presentation. Other people would love to hear that. Fantastic, right? And I think they can do it in a way that they're not going to put themselves at a competitive disadvantage. A lot of times in the early, this is back to the chasm model again, when you're an early adopter, you're doing it because you believe it gives you competitive advantage. And so you're probably not willing to talk much about it because it's not fully baked yet. You're trying to get it there. And when you do, you have real competitive advantage. The other companies in your industry move over because they have to, because you're now crushing them and they have to do something. So I think you got to get enough of them and people saying, okay, it's no longer a competitive advantage at that particular level. You need them to have more of a Toyota attitude. Where Toyota's like, I'll show anybody the Toyota production system. Because if you think the value is in the rules that we use to govern our business, you miss the point. Right? That's not what makes Toyota great. It's 50 years of cultural adoption, of a mentality of people that, you can show this to car manufacturers all over the world and no one else has been able to replicate what they do. So I think the really great Agile organizations will be, I'll walk you through my organization any day, any time, and happy to show you what we do, and you still won't be able to compete with me because we're that good and we're getting better every day. We're not there yet. But that would be the place to be. But I do think there are more examples than are available, and I think we have to do a better job of finding them. And I think the ScrumAlliance can add a lot of value in this particular area. The excitement to me is that more and more seem to be willing to have the conversation. So, and I gauge that on a very simple metric for me. How many times am I giving executive presentations? Years ago, it was an infrequent event. Now, 1 out of every 4 classes that I teach, I'll do a 60 to 90 minute executive overview at lunch. I'm already on site. It's no additional cost to the company because I'm already there. People have to eat anyway. Bring them into the room, we have food for lunch, and it is precisely 90 minutes good. It's not 2 days good, it's not 1 day good, it is precisely 90 minutes good. But you know what? I had 90 minutes of their time, and I can listen to the debate that's happening during the 90 minutes. Like, do we do that? We should think about doing that. Why aren't we doing that? Hey, at least it starts the conversation. So the frequency at which those discussions are happening, at least for me, have increased a lot over the past couple of years. So I take that as a very positive sign. What worries me? The prevalent attitude of Agile is an IT development organization thing. And I don't know why you're over here talking to me. We'll continue to do things the way we've always done them. Go talk to them. And I think that we need to do a better job of helping people understand why that's not the case. Because I don't fault them for that. You can say, well, that's very short-sighted on their behalf. But until they've been exposed to 60 or 90 minutes, they might not realize, oh, I just thought Agile was a development thing. No, Agile is actually a core set of principles, a core set of values, right? That can be applied in many different ways, in many different contexts. In fact, we do it in development and we get a lot of success there. I'd like to explain how you might consider using them in other areas of your business, and you can evaluate whether or not you think that would be a good fit. But now at least you have the information to make an informed decision. Right now, some people aren't willing to sit at the table to have the discussion. That's, I think, the largest inhibitor. So the joke 20 years ago in the object technology community, right, closer to 30 years ago, was that we'd always say back then, someone might mention, I'm going to an object-oriented design meeting. And what we used to say is, well, no object technology has become prevalent when people no longer say, I'm going to an object-oriented design meeting, I'm just going to a design meeting, and the object-oriented is implied. Success here is simple. We're not talking about Agile in the future because Agile is just implied. It's just the standard way we do things. That is the real success, because why do I need to qualify what I'm about to do with some adjective, right? It is the default of what we're doing. And I think we're moving down that path. We've achieved that in object technology. Object technology today is deemed to be the default way you would do things. And if you're not, you probably have some reason why you're not. Whereas in the past, you almost had to give a justification for why you were doing it. And I need to tell you it's different. Agile arrives when that's no longer necessary.